Is
Noted. Yes, Suna.
no, it's live or no? Is it live?
Yeah, he's making it live. It will be
Yes,
live.
it's live now. I'm letting him.
And yeah, he'll enter the participants. Please, shut down their audios and videos as usual. And
I think the pen is down there.
okay, we'll wait for another 2 minutes.
Sure. Pardon?
I'll just say meeting.
Oh, yeah. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. Just we'll wait for another 2 minutes and then we'll get started.
In progress.
Okay. Looks good. But that's going to be a sound problem. All right. Looks good. Feel free to move this and use this chair and the table if you want. Just put it in the corner.
Yeah. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on your time zones. And welcome to the 13th TEG talk. We started last year in July 2023, and we had our first talk on July 27th, to be precise. This is the 13th talk on July 20th, 2024. And as you all know, we try to keep a balance of what I call as practice, paper, and policy. We get people from academia, we get people from the corporate world, but also from the policy world. And the idea has been, as you all know, I've been repeating on the previous TEG talks, the idea is to create a platform for synergies where people can collaborate, people can look for opportunities, people can share their insights, especially to help and support the young entrepreneurs, but also to create some kind of synergies across different domains, as we all have been seeing. So that's the whole idea, and that's what we have been continuing. So the one idea is to have talks and lectures and some kind of master classes as we have been doing, but also to have some kind of actual training sessions or actual in-person conferences that we are planning for going down the line. And we are moving in that particular direction. We have an active WhatsApp group where people collaborate, people seek for synergies. That's one part of our platform building that we do. And this is indeed, like, as we complete 1 year, and we have one of the renowned professors, Professor Saras, with us at the moment. So previously we also had other professors. Professor Venkat, as you all know, who gave a talk, is her colleague, and you may or may not be surprised to know that from the same Darden School of Business. And that was a fantastic lecture. And he also talked about Professor Saras. So I thought, okay, it would be a nice idea to invite Professor as well. And at the moment, she is in India, so it's a little bit easier to have those. So anyways, not taking much time, I will ask my colleague Sune to formally introduce Professor Saras, and then we can move forward.
Yeah. Hello. Professor Sarasvathy is the Paul Hammaker Professor in Business Administration at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business and the Jamuna Raghavan Chair Professor in Entrepreneurship at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. She also teaches doctoral programs in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Sarasvathy is best known for her concept of effectuation, a theory of entrepreneurial action based on the study of expert entrepreneurs. Named for its contrast to causal thinking, a tenet of managerial decision-making, effectual thinking or is means-driven, and eschews, predictive thinking, common in large companies. In 2022, the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum and the Research Institute of Industrial Economics awarded her the highest recognition for research in the field of entrepreneurship, 2022 Global Award for Entrepreneurship Research. Sarasvathy came into academia after co-founding and running 5 ventures spanning 3 countries. Currently, she serves on the board of Lending Tree, Nasdaq Tree, Upeka, a SaaS accelerator in Bangalore, India, as well as on the advisory board for academic institutions in Europe and Asia. Sarasvathy also serves on the editorial boards or as associate editor of several academic journals. Her award-winning journal article, Causation and Effectuation, toward a theoretical shift from economic inevitability to entrepreneurial contingency, is one of the most highly rated academic articles about entrepreneurship of all time. Sarasvathy received a master's degree in industrial administration and a PhD in information systems from Carnegie Mellon University. Her thesis on entrepreneurial expertise was supervised by Herbert Simon, 1978 Nobel laureate in economics. In addition to Babson College in the US, universities around the world, India, China, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, have also recognized Sarasvathy's contribution to entrepreneurship research and education by awarding her 3 professorships and 4 honorary doctorates. With that, I hand it over to Professor Sarasvathy.
Yeah, so I think this is a shortened version that I have put there. So it is a much longer. If you see her CV, it is like a 27, 28 page CV. If you see her number of research papers, it's around 100 research papers, plenty of books. So there are a lot more things out there, but this is a shortened version. So yeah, please, Professor, up to you. You can just start with your talk and presentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Vaibhav, for inviting me. And thank you, Sunai, you poor thing. You had to look up all this stuff and explain it to people. And entrepreneurs and others around the world, don't worry too much about the past. Let's actually make sure I earn it today in our hour or so that we have together. And of course, Vaibhav, I want to mention for a moment, I'm always very, very honored and very gratified to be following Venkat on anything. In fact, Venkat was one of the main reasons I actually ended up in Darden, and had just an amazing time together intellectually. And so anything that you give me credit for in what I say today, he definitely has a very big part of that credit. So I'm just happy you mentioned Venkat, and I'm really happy to be following him on the TED Talks. Okay, so the way I have planned that we can have a conversation, I teach at Darden, and lectures are not the usual thing. I never enjoyed lectures as a student, but I know that when we do something like this, there is a certain amount of one-way aspect to it. But all the same, I encourage you all to ask questions, make Vaibhav's life tough, because he's going to follow your questions on chat. And I have already told him that in between, if he wants to interrupt, he can. And also, as I present the talk, at certain moments in the talk, also, I will pause and specifically ask for questions too. So let's try if we can make it a little bit more interactive than a normal webinar that is just going out one way. All right, so here goes. And although it's been more than 2 decades, I usually like to introduce effectuation by telling you just a little bit about the research from where this came. And then I will go into the key findings and then maybe dive a little deeper and deeper and deeper. So we'll start sort of at the high level and then go deeper and deeper, and then we can go wherever you want to go. So here goes, all right? Give me a second. Prezi sometimes does this. I want to make sure this thing moves.
Okay. It's working well, yeah.
So let's go to the research roots here just for a couple of minutes. Almost everything I'm going to talk to you about today comes from research, but the research comes from practice, in the sense that I've been an entrepreneur before coming into academia. And in my research, I wanted to understand what is teachable and learnable about entrepreneurship. We know for a fact that not everything that one learns through experience is actually teachable or learnable. More than that, even if there are things that are teachable and learnable, not everything can be taught and learned in a classroom. So with that in mind, there is still way more things that we can actually learn and teach than they used to in my time. So when Sunay mentioned my background, he said my PhD in information systems. There's a good reason for that, because there was no such thing as a PhD program in entrepreneurship when I came into academia, not even in the United States. So on the one hand, I was horrified, but on the other hand, the street smart entrepreneur in me was, thought, okay, this is an opportunity, right? So I decided to take my exams in information systems. But when I got to work with Herbert Simon, he was like, very, very supportive of the idea of doing what may be considered the first major dissertation that looked into the learnings that expert entrepreneurs have. So when you think about expert entrepreneurs, I need to clarify at least 2 things. One is, we are not talking only success. So we don't want to be sampling on success. So what we actually look for is expertise. And an expert entrepreneur has 10 to 15 years or longer full-time immersive experience, starting and running multiple ventures. And they have been through every experience that entrepreneurship can offer, from failures to proven successes. And so one of the criterion was each of these entrepreneurs also had to have taken at least one company public. So when you look at this set of criteria, you can see not many people qualify. So there were only 245 people in the world who qualified. I wrote to all of them, and 45 people agreed to participate in the study. The second thing I want to tell you about expert entrepreneurs and the original study is that it's not just a series of interviews or case studies. It was truly a study based on cognitive science. And what I mean by that is, cognitive science is the science of decision, science of thinking, learning, things like that. And at Carnegie Mellon University, Simon and his students and colleagues had invented a method called Think Aloud Verbal Protocols to study experts in a number of domains, starting with chess. And so, as you can guess, this was also the of artificial intelligence to some extent. Herbert Simon is celebrated as one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence. So it was methods like this where you go and talk with experts, but you don't interview them. You actually make them do the things that they are expert in, and you ask them to talk continuously instead of just think aloud. So you're talking all the time. So if you're going to study chess grandmasters, for example, you would have them in 2 separate rooms as they play chess, and each one, while they're making the next move, they're asked to talk continuously so that the researcher can look into, as it were, to find out what kind of information do they look for first, what kind of information do they ignore, what is the first thing they do, what's the second thing they do, how. So you can actually literally diagram out how they think. And that's the method that I used with the expert entrepreneurs. I created a 17-page problem set of 10 typical decisions that all of you if you're starting companies, go through in some ways. But remember, these are entrepreneurs, these expert entrepreneurs. They've built companies in every industry you can imagine, right? But I am going to them the exact same 17-page problem set consisting of a lot of messy information from which they have to make marketing decisions, finance decisions, hiring decisions, every decision that you can imagine. So I'm in a way forcing them all to work with the same data and make exactly the same decisions. And that is how we got something that was actually comparable, that we could take to peer-reviewed journals. And so when I talk about research roots, I mean, there is like actual research here. And that was just the first study. And since then, over the last 2 decades and more, there's been a lot of follow-on work, not only by myself and my collaborators, but literally hundreds of researchers the world. There are about 7 articles in total and 100 in top journals. And then we have also, once this thing, we found its feet and we said, okay, maybe there is something here. We also had to develop teaching materials, and the teaching materials didn't exist. So we collected hundreds of case studies from around the world as part of that. So this is just my background on the research, where this information is coming from. Now let's start diving into the findings. As I said, we'll start very broad and then get narrower and narrower and deeper. So here we go. I'm not quite sure why this is giving me trouble here, but give me a second. Okay, so those of you who are technologists around there, you guys I hold you responsible as to why my laptop is creating some troubles for me. Fix that, will you? All right, okay, so let's ask, what are expert entrepreneurs expert in? So initially we think of course, they're expert in starting companies and running companies and starting successful companies. And so they must be good at a toolboxes, right? They know how to do marketing, how to raise money, or how to do strategy and hiring and all of those kinds of things. And true, they are good at that. We also think that they're good at certain toolboxes, but it turns out when you actually go look very deeply like this in a research study, expert entrepreneurs are actually experts. Okay, I'm having trouble here. Okay, they're experts in making decisions under uncertainty. Now, what do I mean by uncertainty? It's actually a multi-dimensional, dynamic uncertainty. So imagine a situation, a problem space, where the future is not only unknown, but it's unknowable. And your own goals are ambiguous. It's not clear what you should be shooting for. On top of that, the information is isotropic, which means that all kinds of information come at you and you don't know what's relevant and what's not relevant. A lot of people think that uncertainty means you don't have enough information. Whereas entrepreneurs live in a world where the opposite problem is there. Because the future is unknowable, any and all information may be relevant, right? And we live in a world in which we drown in information. And so if as an entrepreneur, you go and talk to a bunch of people, different people are going to tell you different things. Customers are going to say, here's something I want, here's something I hate, and some other customer is going to say something else. And then the investor is going to say a third thing. And then if you talk to a more experienced entrepreneur, they they will say 4, 5, and 6 different things. And so you get confused as to what you should and shouldn't do. So that is the idea of isotropic information. And there is too much information and you don't know what's relevant. So when all of these 3 things are going on, how do you think? How do you decide? How do you act? And that is actually the idea, the framework behind effectual thinking, effectual action, effectual decision making. So now let's actually look at the key finding. So as you can imagine, again, at the high level, as a PhD student, I'm going around collecting this data from all these people who are enormous amounts of experience. And I start thinking, what is like going on? And for a while, it's not clear what's going on. And any of you who have undertaken any research know that that is one of the phases of research when you feel like you have designed the study very well. And so it was not very clear what was going on until I started seeing one very strong pattern. And that is these expert entrepreneurs, whenever presented with any predictive data, they would ignore it, or they would actively say something nasty about it. They will say things like, I hate market research. It has never worked for me, stuff like that. These financial projections. Sure, you do these projections for the sake of investors, but God forbid you start believing your own projections, So things like that. So they were explicitly, but also in a more indirect ways, every time there was predictive information, they would diss prediction, right? So that gave me the idea that there was something going on here, which is almost like an inversion of everything that we teach in an MBA program. Because in an MBA program, we're always teaching people how to predict better. And what is the reason for that? It's not a bad thing, right? It's very logical. To the extent we can predict the future, we can control it. And that's why we develop techniques of prediction, and we teach people how to predict how the market might react or how risks might happen in the future. So you can calculate risk-adjusted cash flows for the future. Or even when you're hiring somebody, you want to be able to predict who will do better than the others. That's how we set up interview protocols and things like that. But the expert entrepreneurs, because of their experiences dealing in that problem space of the unknowable future and isotropic information and ambiguous goals, one of the things they learn is, well, you know what? I'm in a world in which prediction really doesn't work. So why am I trying so hard to predict? I'm just not going to predict at all. Instead, I'll go directly to the root, right? Why am I predicting normally? In order to control it. So let me just reverse it. So now I am just going to think about control as a strategy, right? To the extent that we can control the future, we don't need to predict it. I know this sounds very provocative and interesting, and maybe even ask the question, how do you control a future that you cannot predict? That seems profound and idiotic at the same time. So I'm going to give you the high-level answer from the research, and then we'll start diving deeper into it. The high-level answer is that you turn control into a strategy. What does that mean? It means that you're always dividing the world into things that you can control and things you cannot control. So work with what is already within your control, and then you co-create the future. You're going to shape it. You're going to influence it. But you're not doing it alone. You're going to work with stakeholders. But these are stakeholders who self-select into the process. So to the extent that you work with things within your control and people who want to work with you, together you can shape and influence the future. So it's more like sculpting with, rather than going out and predicting where the big opportunities are and then placing a bet on it. So that's the high-level idea behind effectual logic. So now I'm going to take you one level deeper into it by thinking about this thing. Think about science in a way, right? In science, what do? We always think about science as prediction is extremely important, right? Science is all about being able to predict better. So if you think about prediction and control, it is several centuries of scientific training has taught us that prediction is coextensive with control, right? So the relationship between prediction and control is just like a vanishing point. So prediction leads to control. That's the way we think about the relationship between prediction and control. But the experience of these expert entrepreneurs has taught them to separate these two things so it becomes a space. So what happens is, from a vanishing point of relationship between prediction and control, we get this space. And the moment we get this space, we get this nice 2x2, which makes management professors very happy. I'm not at all ashamed of it, because I'm also a cognitive scientist, and I know the brain can process only certain amount of information. And that's why we find 2x2s very, very useful. But the key here is to go from a point to a space. And what happens is, now you get this nice way of thinking about the relationship between prediction and control through your own decisions and thoughts and actions. So you get 4 quadrants at least, but you don't have to think of them completely separately. But just for the sake of explanation, I'm going to keep them separate for a while before we start thinking about navigating space. So here we go. This is everybody's dream. You know, they look at this and say, oh, I can see what is around the corner. I can see the future, and I'm going to go out and make it happen. And a lot of people think that that is a great entrepreneur, right? The visionary entrepreneur. But you can also go the other way. For those of you in technology, you know that visionary thing doesn't really work most of the time. So you got to be nimble and agile and adaptive. So low in prediction and low in control is also a set of toolkits, a set of strategies that you need to have. And the other two I have mentioned already, which is the idea of causal, which is high in prediction and low in control. This is what we do a lot of work in, and we teach in MBA program. But these expert entrepreneurs are in the lower right-hand quadrant, which is low in prediction and high in control. So this framework, we are going to come back a couple of times. So when we look at this particular framework, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start honing in on the same framework, thinking in terms of action rather than just strategy. So let's take a look at that here. So it's the same 2x2 and the same 4 quadrants here, but now simply think about actions you take as an entrepreneur. If you're just starting out, or maybe you build a company to some extent. In fact, a lot of research, since the original research, we have even looked at people inside larger companies and even beyond business altogether. But still, for our talk today, I'll just keep it to entrepreneurship for a while and say, let's just start with, I don't know what to do. And we have 4 quadrants that tells you the kinds of things that you can do. So let's start here with the adaptive quadrant, low in prediction, low in control. A lot of novice entrepreneurs, early mindset, and they are always trying to learn. They ask for help and information and advice, and then customer interviews, and then they are ready to change, and they have to pivot. They have to be nimble, and they have to be quick to respond to anything that they learn or any changes that come at them. From that, we can go to a more predictive stance. You get a little bit more sophisticated. Then you start doing market research. You analyze the market. You analyze cash flows. You start forecasting your future cash flows. And as you start bringing these things together into a business model, you can actually plan. And then, of course, you get to go out and pitch whatever it is that got you started on this path, your idea. You can follow your passion. You pitch to people. You're trying to convince people in a visionary way. You want to get people to follow you, to invest with you. You're persuading, you're persisting, all those kinds of actions. But remember, so far, I haven't told you the actions in the effectual quadrant. But still, I want to pause for a minute and take any questions people might have on what I've said so far, because the next 2 slides, we are going to take a deep dive into effectual thinking and effectual action. But
Yes,
I've given
Professor.
you enough from the bird's eye view that you should have some questions by now.
There is a question, Rekha, and she's asking, was there a deliberate diversity in the entrepreneurs selected in all aspects like gender, age, race, industry, education, background, and net worth? That is our question.
Good luck with that, Suleika. It is a good question. It's an excellent question. But at the time this study was done, remember this study was done in 97, 98, and we are looking for people with 15 years or longer, full-time, immersive experience, starting multiple ventures, and taken at least one company public. So how diverse do you think that population would be? So those were the criteria. So we did not use diversity as a criterion per se. So very, very non-diverse would be my answer to your question. There were a few women and there were people from multiple countries, but that's about the extent of the diversity that was there in the original population, not just the sample, but the population of entrepreneurs to begin with. However, the good news is, since then, studies have been done around the world with multiple samples, family businesses, international businesses, refugee camps, I mean, you name it. And also, we have been teaching around the world. For example, a colleague of mine in Brazil converted a lot of the research into what she calls language neutral. So you can teach poor illiterate people, and a huge majority of those poor illiterate people were women. These were in rural parts of Brazil, not necessarily in Rio and Sao Paulo. And she has taught something like 200,000 people. And that is just one example. I mean, there literally are hundreds of examples of different populations to whom people have been teaching, but from whom people have been collecting data and analyzing. And as I said, I myself have lost track of everything that's out there. So diversity is no longer a problem. I would think it's a safe bet to say in terms of whether we can teach this. But if you want to think about expert entrepreneurs, even today, using the definition of expertise, you're not going to find that much diversity. And that is a sad part of the world that we live in. But all I can tell you is there is progress, and it's only going to be a question of time before we find more entrepreneurs from very diverse backgrounds. But here is the intellectually what is interesting about this is every study that has looked at it so far, we do know that this is generalizable across countries and cultures and populations, but also across history. So people have done studies, they have shown how Picasso and Braque used effectual thinking and effectual action to build cubism, for example. So it seems to be a very general theory, but you can also see why it is a general theory. So right here in the 2x2, right, prediction and control are some of the most generalizable dimensions you can think of for human beings, right? All of us live in this prediction control space, not only entrepreneurs. So prediction and control frames the way we interact with each other and with the universe. So and that is one of the reasons it's very generalizable. And then one last word on diversity, the companies that these expert entrepreneurs had built, they were a lot more diverse, if you will, and covered every kind of population, every kind of market you can imagine. So to that extent, so I want to give you the full idea of diversity. And the short answer, no. Original study, there was not that much diversity, but thereafter we have worked very hard, and there is a lot of studies looking across many different populations, and also a lot of educational programs teaching a wide variety of populations. All right.
So there is another question from Ajay, and he is asking, how did you propose these findings to become predictive as opposite from discovery from a sample of case studies?
Sorry, could you repeat the question a little slower?
How did you propose these findings to become predictive as opposite from discovery from a sample of case studies?
Well, I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'm going to interpret your question to mean that having started with a small number of expert entrepreneurs, how can you claim that this predicts the behavior of a lot of entrepreneurs, right? That may be the way, that's what the question means. So, but remember that it's actually not a small number, because given the definition of expertise, there were only 245 people in the world. That was the entire population. And I wrote to all of them. So the sample was actually a representative sample of that population. So it was not just a random set of cases. That's not what the study was. But then having studied the experts, and this is normal. Imagine, suppose you're studying chess and you want to write a program that plays chess. You're going to go talk to chess. You're going to do this cognitive study of chess grandmasters. And there are not that many chess grandmasters in the world. But when you study these chess grandmasters, what do? You first study the chess grandmasters, then you compare them with people who are not experts. We call them novices, right? So then you look at novice chess players, and now you see the differences, and then now you can go teach novices to improve their skills. That's what we really do. We don't predict the behavior of other entrepreneurs. We learn from the expert entrepreneurs, and then we teach people in other groups. And in deciding what to teach them, we do these comparison studies. So you can take expert entrepreneurs and you compare them with novice entrepreneurs, with students, with expert corporate managers who have no entrepreneurial experience, with family business owners. So that's what you're doing. But the expert study remains the expert study. And everything else is a comparison with the experts. And then whatever differences you find, you use to develop things that you can teach people so people can learn. So we are not trying to predict people's behavior. We are actually trying to educate people so that the difference between the experts and others can be reduced as much as it can inside a classroom. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think, Professor, there are questions around sample itself, because I think one is asking about, what was the distribution of those, around 250 entrepreneurs that you are talking about, and in which quadrants probably they would be lying. That is one question. Other question, because your study is around 1997, 1998. So did this sample had more people from manufacturing and service industries, because it's like pre-IT, .com kind of stuff. So that's there are questions around sample basically.
This might be a very young person. 1997, 98 was not pre-IT. Let me tell you, that built the basis for IT that all of us are working on today, right? This was the boom, the internet boom was going on at that point in time. Let me answer the more serious part of the question, which is, so one of the things we made sure when we selected the sample was we wanted people who had built ventures in every industry you can imagine. So the diversity of industry was huge. So we had the usual suspects, right? Software and biotech, but we also had manufacturing, we had personal services, we had railroad and steel and everything that you can imagine. So they made sure there was a lot of variance across industries, because the whole idea was to extract entrepreneurial expertise, right? Not expertise that works in one industry versus another industry, right? So that's really the issue in terms of, so the studies included every kind of venture and industry that you can possibly imagine, except perhaps, social media was not such a big thing at that point in time. But other than that, we covered the ground on that. And Vaibhav, can you remind me what was the first question? You said two questions. And
so because you mentioned that your population, because this question talks about sample, but your sample was around 45. It was not 250. But this guy is asking about what was the distribution of those population of 250 entrepreneurs or 200
this is
entrepreneurs.
what I'm telling you. First of all, I am happy if you just go to effectuation.org. The original study is available for you to download and take a look at. It's a paper published in the Journal of Marketing. But also, I have a research book where I go into great depths of the details of the samples and everything. So as I said, the only thing you need to know is we had lots of variety on industry, and these are people who had 15 years or longer full-time immersive experience. So as you can imagine, most of them are older people, right? They're not young people for sure. But that is by definition in expertise, you're going to get people who have been doing that for 10 or 15 years or longer. And if you want more details on that, just look it up. It's all there. Even the original instrument is there in my book. So this is the tradition of research. Everything is very transparent. So shall I keep going, Vaibhav?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, there's no more questions.
If there are more questions, you can always come back as well.
Sure.
Okay, so you've taken a look at, if you want to just think about the kinds of actions that, oh, I think that person also asked whether they were distributed in all 4 quadrants.
Yeah.
And that I have to tell you, that of course they weren't, because we did not have the theory at that point in time, right? So all I knew was these are expert entrepreneurs. And I can give you one number. More than 2/3 of them, for more than 3/4 of the time, prefer to use effectual logic. So when you analyze the data, of course, they're using all the different logics, they are experts, but they had this overwhelming preference for using effectual logic. And that is really the one number that might be worth sharing at this point. So it turns out that expert entrepreneurs are effectual. Is a pretty nice shorthand conclusion, right? Approach all kinds of decision making from an effectual perspective. And that's why I need to get into and tell you a little bit more about the effectual perspective. So let's go there. So the standard actions, you have these sets of actions of being able to pivot, being able to plan, being able to pitch, that comes from each of the 3 quadrants. So what do you do in the effectual quadrant? You already know, based on what I told you, that you're going to be co-creating and shaping the future, which is not what you do in any of the other quadrants all that much, although visionary is a very interesting one in terms of wanting to shape the future. So, okay. So there are 5 principles of effectuation that came from the original study, and then each of those principles have been studied individually across multiple studies as well. So let's just go into the 5 principles. As you can see, every one of these 5 principles are going to be low in prediction and high in control. And let's see if you can see that. So here we go. And even though I'm going to show you in a particular order, in the next slide, you will see you can actually start anywhere and mix and match these principles. But just for the sake of explaining, I take them in a particular order. So the first one we call the bird in hand principle, which is basically this idea that you're means driven. You look around what things are within your control, and you ask yourself, what can I do with that? Instead of starting with a goal out there and saying, oh, what are the different paths that will take me to that goal? Or maybe I can be creative and come up with new paths that will take me to that goal. So it's not goal driven, right? It's actually means driven. And what happens is then you generate multiple goals or multiple effects from it. That's why this effectual logic to begin with. So the first principle is means driven rather than goal driven thinking. The second one, you start thinking about it. Once you come up with a couple of different ideas or a couple of different possible ventures that you can build, you have to think about resources a little bit. And the standard way to think about resources is you project future cash flows, you project possible risks, and then you calculate the risk adjusted flows, and you pick the one with the better net present value of the future cash flows, this is what we call a mindset of expected return. You're trying to maximize your expected return. These expert entrepreneurs instead are not trying to maximize their expected return. They are actually thinking of affordable loss. And this is a very subjective thing. In affordable loss, what to do, you're trying to keep the downside within your control for sure, right? So you get to decide how much you're willing and able to lose for trying out the venture. But it's also very interesting because of looking at the downside very carefully, the way you look at the upside also changes, because you're asking yourself, do I want to do this even if I lose whatever it is that I'm willing to put into this venture? And so it does bring in a lot of non-economic ideas of return in choosing your venture. But you can see the inversion again, and it's not prediction. So it's everything within your control to some extent. So you use affordable loss instead of expected return. The third principle is the crazy quilt principle. And this principle sometimes comes as a shock to people who are always worrying about competition that's out there. So that's why they're trying to predict what the market size will be and what the growth rate will be and how many competitors are there. Do we have barriers to entry and all those kinds of things? These expert entrepreneurs are saying, who the heck knows? don't even know where the market is. We don't even know whether there is a market. So we are not going to worry about that. Instead, what we are going to do is we are going to make as many partnerships as possible. We are willing to work with anybody and everybody who wants to work with us. And if we can stitch together a deal structure that works for us. That's why I use this Zari quilt from, Gujarat and Rajasthan as an example of this, because this is actually, you just have leftover fabric from other things that you've been stitching and you start putting it together. So the idea here is you are not targeting any specific stakeholders or investors. You're trying to build this network of partnerships. And in the meanwhile, you're not even worrying about competition because you don't know. So very often I tell my students this, right? You can go, partner with your competitor, whoever you think your competitor is. And people are like, mind is blown. How the heck do I do that? So we'll get into some of those details here a little bit. But the focus here is on partnerships rather than on competition. And as you start building this way, you're still going to get things thrown at you from outside. Things outside your control are still going to affect you, even when you try to ignore them. And the lemonade principle, that when life throws lemons, make lemonade. And this idea is you're open to surprise, because surprises can be positive or negative. And if there are negative surprises, you get good at transforming them into opportunities of some kind. Along the way, you start learning a lot about how the future happens, and you start realizing that the future is not some kind of territory that is out there, and it's not some kind of, Russian roulette where you are picking a number and placing a bet. It's actually something that human beings make. We shape through our decisions, through our action, through our partnerships, through our commitments, we actually make the future. So this is a very co-creational, very artifactual, let's make the world kind of attitude to all the problems that come starting and running a company. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 5 principles, these exact same 5 principles, and I'm going to show it to you as a dynamic process on a daily basis. And after that, I'm going to stop for a while and take questions. And if we still have time, I'll show you some examples and stories of how this works. So one way you want to think about it is, and let me give you a starter of an example that in every talk I ever give, I give this example, and people for some reason absolutely love it. And this example is just start in your kitchen, right? If you want to understand these principles, you can start in your kitchen and think about how do you cook. And there are at least 2 different ways you can think about cooking. So if you're cooking causally, you're going to start with a clear idea of the dish you want to make. You're going to look at the recipes. You're going to make sure you have the ingredients, go to the market, get the ingredients, and you're going to make sure you have all the implements, and then you make the dish, right? Whatever dish you choose to make. That is cooking causally. And you can easily see that if you love to cook, most of you are not cooking that. At least I don't. I love to cook, and I don't cook that way. I just come into the kitchen and open the cupboards. I open the fridge. I see what is available. Maybe I look in the garden if I'm lucky enough to be close to a garden. And then I think, okay, what can I make with this? And chances are there are always going to be 1 or 2 missing ingredients, or sometimes I open a packet of masala and I don't know what masala that is. I just have to smell it, right? And then I think, this looks okay, right? I think I can use this masala, that kind of thing. And you can cook effectually. So that's the simplest kind of way you want to think about it. But of course, starting and running companies is way more complex than that, because you have to think about resources, you have to think about relationships, you have to think about, the ball that comes through the window, breaking your window into the kitchen, that you have to think about all of those things. But for the moment, I'm just going to give you with the simplest example of the cooking. And in the next slide, we will complexify that example a little bit, and then maybe even start understanding how this can become a venture in some ways. So let's take a look at the next thing, the effectual process. So it's the same 5 principles, but now I'm going to put it into motion, right? So day 1, you start by things within your control. And in the original study, the expert entrepreneurs were talking about 3 categories of things within your control. Who am I? What do I know? And whom do I know? right? You just start with that, even if you don't have any money. This is why we can teach this to poor illiterate women, no problem at all, because all you really do is to ask yourself, who am I? What do I know? Whom do I know? And then you start asking yourself, what can I do with the things that are already within my control? And you're also asking, what can I do for affordable loss? So to my students, I say, this you can do tonight, right? Day one, tonight you can do this. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, what do? You start interacting with people. You're going to start talking to people. And every entrepreneurship course, every entrepreneurship toolbox is going to teach you that you have to go talk to customers, to do customer interviews, whether you're doing design thinking or lean startup or whatever. But in effectuation, there is something very different here, that when you're talking to people, you're sure you're asking for information and advice and feedback and all of those kinds of things, but you're always asking for more than that. You're asking people to make actual commitments into your venture. So every conversation, and you can talk to anybody and everybody. You don't even have to target any particular stakeholders. You're talking to people who you can talk to. If you want to target somebody, you can target somebody, but you don't have to. You just talk to anybody and everybody, and every conversation is about getting them to put what in the US we call skin in the game, right? So they have to make some actual commitments. And this is one of the hardest things both to learn and to teach. And if you have questions, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the idea here is you're always looking for actual commitments. And the moment somebody makes a commitment, what do you get? Now you get new means, and that sets up this expanding cycle of resources. Immediately, it becomes about who we are and what we know and whom we know. So that it becomes this expansion of resources, even if it may or may not involve big money. Every commitment sort of expands your resources, the co-created resources. But if you are talking to people who actually have something important to offer and they care about their venture and they want to come on board, they are not going to be just attracted by your idea per se, right? They will have their own vision, their own ideas about your ideas. And so they will also be suggesting changes in your goals, changes in the way you are doing things. And that sets up like this converging cycle. So it becomes about what can we do? And the moment we make a commitment, now we are committed to doing that, right? So there is a certain amount of convergence that begins to happen in this process. Both the expanding cycle and the contracting, courses of action, the commitments that we have made, they both keep on happening over time. And along the way, of course, from the world outside, lemons get thrown at us that actually impacts your burden hand and impacts your affordable loss at any given point in time. That also changes it. And as it changes, you interact with people again and you get more commitment. You interact with people who are already your stakeholders, but also other people who might want to come in now that this thing has happened, good or bad. This whole process, through this process, you come not only to just your venture, you end up building new ventures, new markets, new futures altogether that you yourself might never have dreamed of. And that is why it's like super non-predictive, right? Not only are you not using predictive information, you end up building something that neither you nor your stakeholders might actually have foreseen ahead of time. And so when you look at this particular process, just go back to the cooking example for a minute. So now if you start cooking and you realize you don't have a couple of ingredients, you can either adapt, right? And you start making something, or you can say, hey, I have this other ingredient which would never normally go into this recipe. So let me throw that in there. And or you might say somebody, let me ask my neighbor, do they have that ingredients? You start asking your neighbor, or your guests come in and they bring you something else altogether, and you say, okay, I can do that. And so the issue really is people coming in and out, and you're going out and to talking to a neighbor or whatever else is going on. All of that can go into your cooking process in an interesting way. in the process, as you build it, chances are going to be very high that you end up cooking something that you may or may not have thought. It may not even look like what you set out to cook. So it becomes very important for us to think, are we just saying this is just some messy process by which anything and everything goes? And think carefully about that answer, right? It still depends whether you are a good cook or not, because your competence, your skills are very, very important. Assuming you are a very good cook, if you cook causally, what happens? You will get exactly what you set out to cook. But if you cook effectually, assuming you're a good cook, you will get a very good dish that everybody will enjoy eating, but it may not look like anything that anybody has ever cooked before or eaten before. There's a small probability of that happening, but there is a very good probability there will be some innovation in the process. So the idea here in terms of performance is that if success happens, then the success is likely to be more innovative, varying degrees of innovation, but innovation is much more likely even if nobody intended to be innovative in the process. The process is inherently innovative. And then if you have innovative people coming in and building innovative things, of course, you can get very, very innovative outcomes. But the idea here is even if you're building something very mundane, the chances are you will end up with something innovative. But it's also interesting to look at the other side. What if you failed, for example? So again, go back to the cooking example. Let's say something happens, some distraction outside the window and you run out. And by the time you come back, everything got burnt, right? Even if you're a very good cook, that can happen to you because some emergency happened. But the idea is if you were cooking causally, chances are the cost of your failure is going to be higher because you took a certain amount of time, went out to buy particular ingredients and implements, and you're trying to make exactly whatever the thing that you're setting out to make. Whereas in the effectual case, you just use things that were already available. And especially you're investing no more than you can afford to lose. And so in this process, when you start looking at it, on the upside, the probability of innovation is higher. And on the downside, the costs of failure are lower because nobody loses more than they can afford to lose. And so now you can see why expert entrepreneurs are really strong about thinking effectually about these things, because under uncertainty, this not only makes a lot of sense, that pushes you into action very quickly. So you're not waiting to find all the data and the money and everything in order to start. You can literally start tomorrow morning, right? So it's very quick to market in some ways. It is very systematic. It is teachable and learnable, but most importantly, it has these two benefits, both on the upside and on the downside. And so expert entrepreneurs become just, real fans of this logic, and they begin using it in a variety of different ways throughout their careers, not only in startups. So let me stop here for a minute, and I've got a couple of video clips from actual entrepreneurs that I can show you if you want to. But before we go into that, I would love to take some more questions. I think, Vaibhav, we are doing great on time. I see it's 9:27. So we have a half an hour for questions, and then we can just end, 20 minutes at least for questions, and then we can end the last 5 minutes or so where they can listen directly from the entrepreneurs. By this time, they probably are tired listening to my voice. So
Yeah, so there are a couple of questions. So one question which was asked previously, but I was waiting to take it in the end, which is, are studies being done now reinforcing the findings, or is there a shift? So yeah, so either you could take this question in the end once you have done.
No. As I said, there are ongoing studies. Every week I get a paper. I've lost track actually. As I mentioned, there are 700 studies in the last 25 years, at least. I think the last count was 755, something like that. And we particularly track the ones in top tier journals. And so we have tracked over 100 so far on that. Doesn't mean that I remember every one of them, but I do get to hear of them because people do send the papers and things like that. And then these are all also all on, if you have access to a university, a lot of them are in regular public top journals that you can get access to. You can also go on Google Scholar and look for them. There are lots and lots and lots of studies of every kind, including there are critiques and there are dialogues, and it has become a literature stream of its own. And if you go to effectuation.org, we do have all these papers collected, and wherever possible, we have PDFs that you can directly download if you're interested in the research. But as I said, there is, in a way, I think teaching also is a kind of data collection, right? As you teach, you realize what is it that we can teach, what is it that we cannot teach, and how does this work? And you can see changes in the behaviors of your students. So there are multiple ways, and now people are even conducting studies of teaching itself, teaching effectuation. So that, yeah, the number of studies are not at issue here. So, and it's definitely an ongoing stream of research.
Okay, another question was asked by Shrikant, and he's asking, does the bird in hand principle impact starting your entrepreneurial journey with a vision statement and that you resonate with is backward? So that's what his question. Yeah.
That's a great question. It's not that it is backwards. It is immediately narrowing down your world, right, into things that now you're kind of constraining yourself to whatever is in the vision statement in some ways. But of course, sometimes people write vision statements like, I am going to change the world, right? I am going to end poverty. I mean, if you have that kind of a vision, that's okay. Because it doesn't tell you what to do the next morning, right? So in fact, one of my students actually challenged me, and he said, oh, you're saying I don't need a specific goal. I have a clear goal and a vision. And here's my vision. It is specific. He says, I want to make $40 million by the time I'm 40. And that is like really specific, really clear. And I said, okay, I mean, I'm not going to tell you the name of the student, but I said, okay, Joe, so tell me, what are you going to do tomorrow morning? And it's not clear, right? So people write down these vision statements. It doesn't mean a damn thing, because A, you don't know how you're going to actually enact it. And B, because you have this vision statement, now you're always going to think only in certain ways. Your mind is sort of blinkered in a way. So instead, if you just simply say, what is it that I can do today that maybe somebody else wants to pay for? Or if you're a social entrepreneur, you can ask, what is it that I can do that can actually make a difference in this particular problem? And then day two, you start interacting with other people, right? Look at people who are already doing something in that space and say, how can I partner with you? Look at people who have the problem and say, how can I partner with you? So look, if you want to look at how Mohammed Yunus built Grameen Bank, that is a classic story of an amazing, amazing solution to poverty, which on the one hand, Grameen Foundation started out non-profit, but they are lending money, and the way they are getting rid of poverty is making a lot of women into entrepreneurs who are actually making profit in a way. So they almost redefined the relationship between profit and social benefit. And that's why Yunus talks about social business. So if you look at that story, it's a fabulous story. He's just an economist doing research in Bangladesh. And he notices that every time there is a flood or any other natural disaster, a lot of people just lose their livelihoods. And then he asks themselves, how much money does it take to restart that livelihood, like a little brick kiln business or something? And the first time he noticed that was something like about $40 or $25 or something like that, he could help 40 businesses get restarted. Like you and me, he had the money, so he decided to lend it to them. And he wasn't even thinking lending, he was just giving the money away to them. But after a year or so, they come back and return the money, and they bring him gifts. And then he realizes, why the heck aren't we doing this? Why aren't banks lending? And then you start thinking about that, and then I can go into the story in great detail, the people he meets and how it becomes a foundation and how the foundation then becomes a bank and all of that. If you look at the stories, every aspect of it you will see is very effectual. It's not somewhere along the line, did somebody write a vision statement? Sure, right? But the vision itself is co-created, right? It comes about by your action and interaction with people and people's reaction. And then eventually you're shaping the venture. But as you're shaping the venture, you're also shaping the vision. So yes, in that sense, if you just start with a vision statement, it's probably backward, but it's not a bad idea to write down your vision or think that through. Usually it's not very helpful in immediately telling you what you can do. So here's what I would suggest. If you are actually inspired by writing down a vision statement, write it down, but then ask yourself, who am I? What do I know? Whom do I know? And what can I do with things already within my control? And more importantly, how do I work with other people who might have a different vision as well, right? So they're not necessarily going to buy into my vision. Don't stop them because they're knocking on the door and they want to work with you. Don't stop them because their vision is different from yours. And that's where you want to take a look here, that you have to be flexible in your goals as well. So you have a big umbrella vision, but how you're implementing the vision on the day-to-day basis can be reshaped by other people who are coming on board. And that is when you get out of your narrow constraints of your vision statement, and it becomes a vision in which a lot of other people have emotional ownership because they get to shape that vision a little bit. So do not underestimate the power of what you can do if you're actually flexible in the way you actually think about your vision. All right.
All right, there's another question from Kim. When and where does the North Star, which is purpose, vision, etc., show up in this system of thinking?
Lovely question. And I mentioned Venkat, my colleague. The other love of my life, the other colleague I should mention is Ed Freeman, who is a business ethics professor at Darden. And he has written a lot about things like purpose and authenticity and things like that. So, and also Medtronic has been a company that we have studied, and the founder is one of the most effectual entrepreneurs you can find if you look at the history of the founder of Medtronic. And the CEO of Medtronic wrote a book, right? North Star, Bill George, everybody reads that book. And even the concept of North Star, people come from that book. I don't know whether you read the book and that's where you got it from. But let's talk about it. Day one, right? Who am I? That's your North Star, right? That who am I includes your preferences and your tastes, but it actually is most important thing it includes is your value systems, things that you actually care about, things that you will never compromise, right? Things that will never go into your affordable loss, right? Values, every one of these, look at these principles. These are not only about the financial, they're also about the psychological, the emotional, the interpersonal, the social in many, many ways, right? So right, the very first thing in effectuation, who am I? Right there, you have your North Star, right? So nowhere, so when you go through this process, I said a minute ago, allow other people to self-select in, allow them to shape the vision. But remember, you get to allow, but you can also walk away. Right? You are the first stakeholder in your own venture. And so you can always walk away from a deal if it is somehow messing with your North Star in any way. But that doesn't mean that other people's North Star are something that you do not want to think about ever, right? So you do want to always be true to your values, but you want to be open to being persuaded by others. You want to be open to persuade others in such a way that the things that are not affordable loss for you, you're not going to risk, including your most important values.
All right, there's another question from Satyanarayan. And the question is, does effectuation supports self-regulation and whether it precedes planning?
Excellent questions. So in some ways, again, going back to who am I, right? That's just that bird in hand, who I am, what I know, and whom I know, of course, assumes that you have some amount of self-awareness. It doesn't mean that you have to be capable of all kinds of heroic personality traits or self-regulation to the nth degree or anything of that kind. But you have to have a certain amount of self-awareness on day one. And as you go through this process, right, you are going to have these moments where you have to think about your own emotional investments. Like when you're talking to an important stakeholder and they say, you know what, this is not at all the way I would do it. Here is how I would do it. And if you want to do it that way, come talk to me, right? Sometimes you feel like you lost something, right? Because the stakeholder is changing your vision in some way. Or it could be that you made a commitment and the stakeholder made a commitment, and then thereafter they did not quite deliver. So all the difficult moments, remember, you still have to be a good cook. So all the difficult moments of leadership and all the difficult moments of dealing with the outside world and the contingencies that happen, you're trying to deliver product and something goes wrong. All of those things are always going to happen. So a certain amount of ability to regulate your own emotional responses, and also being able to come up with some techniques, right? Think about the lemonade, when life throws lemons at you, right? You have to, there are moments, I tell people, and I've been through these moments myself as an entrepreneur, there are moments when you have to like sit in the middle of chaos and become the Buddha for 5 minutes, right? And that is the kind of regulation that the experience demands of you sometimes. So all of those things you still have to be, you're not exempt. But the interesting thing is you're not exempt if you're following the causal process either, right? So no matter whatever process you follow, if you're doing a lot of prediction and planning and doing all of that, still there are going to be moments where self-regulation becomes an important thing. Now, the second half of your question, the effectual process actually sort of in some ways precede planning. So that is too simplistic a way. Yes and no. Right. So for example, maybe you when I say who I am a person who likes to plan things and predict things and do what happens then, right? So the issue here is not to think about effectual and causal as some kind of sequence in this. Instead, you want to think about it that these are toolboxes. You can start anywhere and move anywhere and mix and match depending on the situation. That's the way you really work. In some cases, right, you don't have enough time to predict anything or plan anything, and you can be factual, right? And if you had the chance, maybe you would have planned. There are other cases you're doing this effectually. You have come to a commitment moment, and you have a commitment. It's a big commitment from a big stakeholder, and you have to deliver on a couple of milestones. And now that it has become 100% predictable, then you should be planning. Right? So what you want to think about it is not which one follows which or which one precedes which. You want to say what are the circumstances within which you're taking action. And if those circumstances fall into the effectual quadrant where being low in prediction and high in control is better, you want to do that. But if you're in a quadrant where a lot of things are actually predictable, then no problem if you use planning. So you want to go back to the 2 by 2. You want to think about the circumstance, and different circumstances call for different strategies, rather than just think about it as a staged process where at one moment you're effectual and then you're causal and then you're adaptive. You can't do it that way. This is not a stage model in that sense. It is a way of thinking about different situations. So when you are with the stakeholder, how do you get to the stakeholder? How do you start the deal structure? Can be, very effectual. But the moment the deal is actually made, it can get causal. And as you start implementing it, life throws some surprise at you. And then you have to bring in the lemonade principle. And so you have to be effectual again, and so all of that can happen.
The good thing, Professor, is that I didn't hear anyone talking about idea is key, because when Professor Venkat was mentioning his talk, everyone was saying, idea is the most important thing. And then by the time his talk ended, people actually understood that, okay, idea is just a small portion of the larger story. There is a lot more in entrepreneurship other than idea. And here it's good that, nobody is still asking, that kind of question.
I'm very thankful to Venkat, and I'm very thankful to you to have called that first, because I just sometimes in the middle of a talk, somebody asks a question and I'll tell them, oh, ideas are dime a dozen. Nobody, anybody can get an idea. There's not, so I don't have to make any of that cases anymore.
Yeah.
But let me give you one little thing from research. If you think idea is important, pick 3 of the companies that for whatever reason inspire you, or 3 social ventures that inspire you, and go look very carefully at the early stage, 0 to 60 mile per hour history of that company. And I bet you 9 out of 10 times, probably 99 out of 100, you will find that the idea they started with was like really mundane. It was not the idea that they ended up building. So you'll probably see that all the time. So you can test this for yourself. How important is idea? I do know one group of people who think that ideas are very important, and they are called venture capitalists. And my answer to you on that one is ignore them, because they do not fund many companies. And I can walk you through the data if you want. In the United States, where there are 500,000 employer firms that get started every year, less than 1,000 will get any VC funding. And then once you get VC funding, your failure rate is 9 out of 10. And if you don't get VC funding, your failure rate is 50-50. So I say ignore, but they think ideas are very, very important and IP is very important. But most actual entrepreneurs, I mean, just think about this. 70% of companies that go public get no venture capital funding. In fact, they get no formal funding whatsoever. So think carefully, where are they getting their funding from? Where did Bill Gates get money? Where did Microsoft get funding from? They didn't go venture capital. IBM funded them. Look at that stakeholder commitment. A customer funded them. So if you think about some of the most successful companies, customers and vendors will fund them. Richard Branson, when he started Virgin Atlantic, Boeing funded them. Like they let him have planes on lease. And so if you make these relationships, B2B relationships with people, or even with just high net worth individuals, but primarily customers and suppliers, that is how a lot of great companies get created. And then you don't have the problem of making a bunch of projections and then raising the money and then trying to deliver on projections, which never happens. Whereas if your customer is funding you, the sale is already made, right? Sales is not a milestone here, right? The customer is funding you literally. Plus, you don't owe them anything. You're not giving them equity. You don't, have to pay them back with interest. Nothing of that kind. So you really want to think very carefully about things like ideas, things like funding, all the hype that you hear in media. Really, you need to rethink. Go back to the stories of companies, and don't go only to TechCrunch or Crunchbase, by the way. Go to the actual company website. Look at a company that you admire, and and go to the early history of that company, and you will find it over and over and over again. Look at Biocon in India, or if you want to look at Kirloskar, right? You can go 100 years ago, and you will see the same effectual process in action in how they build their company. And none of it involved a brilliant idea or like enormous amounts of funding. Both of those things are so way overrated that it drives me crazy. Okay, before I start ranting, before I continue ranting, Vaibhav, let's take the next question.
Yeah, so there are a couple of questions, but we have 10 minutes. So one question related to what you just said is by Urvashi, and she is asking, are more venture capital firms embracing effectual entrepreneurship when looking at investing in startups? So is there a change in the VC world, or still it remains the same what you just talked about? So from your experience, yeah.
That's a great question, and I will answer it to the best of my ability. Are there some venture capitalists out there thinking effectually? Probably, I don't know. Do some of them actually reach out to me and have my colleagues and I worked with some of them? Answer is yes. So there are people doing that. But very early on, we did a study of angel investors, and we found that angel investors are predominantly effectual, and also it makes a difference whether they're effectual or not. And one of the interesting things we found there is a lot of these effectual angel investors find deals that they then take to the VCs. right? So there is an interaction, an effectual causal interaction in the investor space that is going on. That is very interesting as well. But for the most part, I'm sad to say that most venture capitalists, do not really take effectuation seriously, but more importantly, in some ways they cannot, because of their mandate, because they are raising money from other investors that they are answerable to. And so they have to play this portfolio game and get, I don't know, 1 out of 10 home runs. So they're doing something very different and very narrow. They literally are in the prediction and betting game, right? They predict and they place a bet. That's the game they are actually in. And the whole structure is built for that game. And so to bring in effectuation there is a little bit harder as well. But I do have examples of people who are doing some really interesting things in that space, for sure.
Yeah, I think not necessarily that, the survival of the company is their goal as well. Probably they want an easy exit with their profit, as compared to keeping the company survive or startup survive for a long time for any purpose.
It's the fund that has to do well.
Exactly.
Right? Not any one venture in the fund. But let's not go overboard. There are very many different kinds of VCs as well. So some of them are more patient than others. So I don't want to completely, but you're right. On an average, when you look at what's going on in that world, they're definitely, as I said, they're definitely driven by this predict and place a bet. They're literally placing a bet, right? And so long as 1 out of 10 comes in big, they are fine with that. So they are really thinking about their own portfolio as a whole and not of any particular venture. But I don't want to completely dismiss, because not all entrepreneurs are the same and not all investors are the same. So
so before you move on to showing your cases of the actual entrepreneurs, there is one question I think people are now kind of confusing effectuation with something else. So there is one question: is effectuation, effectual thinking, is keeping your expectations or setting your expectations low? Is one of the questions. So which I'm thinking now things are going in the opposite direction, probably. I'm not sure.
Excellent question. So what is effectuation? Reduction and prediction. Is it low expectation? No, it is no expectation, right? The moment you start having expectations, start placing a bet, you're already in the causal territory. Effectuation says you can create, shape the world, right? So it is not an expectation of return. It is an expectation that you can make a difference. And then it says that how much of a difference you make in the world, how much money you make, is a function of how you build and how many different people you can bring on board and how changeable you are, right? So we know when your expectations are high in a predictive sense, it doesn't matter either, because 9 out of 10 times your expectations are going to be proved false, right? What's the point of having high expectations? So effectuation asks, what's the point of having high expectations? Instead, have high energy, right? So you're going to do what you can today, and then you're going to push yourself to the next. You're going to push yourself even some more. You're going to bring in more people. You're going to partner with somebody who is doing better than you. So you can push. So your own returns depends on who you're working with and how you push, right? You have more control over your outcomes. So you don't need to set expectations in that sense. Really, the effectual entrepreneurs will say the expectation is just limitless. There is no end. Doesn't matter if the first venture you start, either doesn't make any money or you make $10 million and you can start 60 companies. What do you care? 60, $10 million companies ain't so bad, right? Or it could be that you start something, you are there with the companies going to, 30, 40, 100, and then for whatever reason you quit, and then it went on to be 2 billion. Does that mean you are a failure? Does that mean your efforts failed? So they say that the whole world is much more interesting, much more nuanced, and much more complex than you think. So all this setting expectation business is a kind of a fantasy game that you're playing, right? If you really want to just place a bet, one of the expert entrepreneurs actually told me, if you want to place a bet, go to Vegas. I am not a risk taker, right? Most entrepreneurs will tell you they are not risk takers. They are not in the game of placing bets. They're in this game of getting up in the morning and shaping and working with people. They're almost like artists with a certain amount of that's what they are. They are doing that. And along the way, something wonderful happens. At that moment, you need to really push this possibility further. But it's up to you how far you push it.
So, Professor, 5 minutes are remaining. Would you like to take more questions or finish it off with the videos of the
I
entrepreneurs?
always love more questions, but
Okay.
I'm going to leave it to your judgment if you want me to show a couple of video clips, if you would like that. It's up to me, up to you.
Yeah, probably maybe you go ahead and maybe we can end up the talk with that. Maybe 1 or 2 videos. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So allow me. I will actually get out of this this presentation altogether. And I thought I had this open, but maybe not. So for those of you who think visionary is the way to go, and that Steve Jobs, of course, would never be listening to other people and talking to other people and asking. I'm going to start with Steve Jobs, and then I'm going to give you one that brings us back to the cooking example. But this time you'll be hearing from. So the first one is Steve Jobs talking about failure, talking about asking in particular. Okay, so let me play that for you. And Vaibhav, keep an eye on and tell me if you can actually hear. This is actually a YouTube video, so you guys should be able to find it anyway. So here we go.
So I'm not able to see it.
That is strange. See, this is why I was a little worried whether it played when we did the rehearsal earlier.
Yeah. No, probably this is an indication that we finish it off with 1 or 2 questions more.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm game to do that.
Yeah, no issues. Yeah. Okay. So I think if it's just maybe people can take this as a screenshot and search for their videos and have a look at it. Okay. So yeah, because it's already, as you mentioned, is already on the YouTube. So
and I will send the link to the whole Prezi.
Yeah.
And they can look at. I have 4 or 5 different little clips that they can take.
That would be great, Professor. Thanks. Yeah. So next question is that. So do you have any advice on how to overcome the unfamiliarity barrier when you approach potential collaborators? Because this is what, effectual entrepreneurship is about. Yeah.
This is why the Steve Jobs clip would have been perfect for that, because he actually talks about how do you call people and ask. So when you think about the first thing you want to do is not to think about it as the unfamiliarity barrier, right? Get that out of your mind. Imagine a very simple thing. You're getting on a train or you're on a plane and somebody's sitting next to you. Are you the kind of person who will never talk to the person sitting next to you? If you are, then you need to worry a little bit, right? If you're the kind of person you will never talk to the person sitting next to you, then maybe you are such a serious introvert that you don't like talking to people. In which case, my advice to you would be go find a co-founder, right? Who is a little bit more gregarious, a little bit more outgoing, and they will do the talking for you. So find one person that you're familiar with who has that other characteristic, and they can now go and talk to people. So that's one solution. But most of us are not introverts in that sense, right? We are human beings. We very naturally pick up a conversation with people. And so the whole idea here is you're not going and talking to somebody and setting up a meeting and shaking hands and saying, hey, give me $2 million, right? We're not asking you to do that kind of thing. The effectual entrepreneurs are saying, just get into conversation with people. Ask them what are they up to. Tell them, here's what I am trying to do. I love this. This is why I'm doing it. I decided to leave my job. I care about this so much. What do you think? What do you do? And then as they start talking, then you start talking. Is there something you start imagining? Is there something that we can do together? If you were me, how would you build my venture? It's that kind of conversation, and then listening to people in such a way that when the time comes, the only thing you really need to practice and learn is don't be afraid to actually ask them for something. So if you're trying to develop a medical device and you happen to be sitting next to somebody who is a doctor or working in the health industry in some way, don't be afraid to ask them, hey, can I set up a meeting with you where I can come and show you a presentation? Or what would it take for me to be able to make like an initial sale to your hospital or to your organization? That when the moment comes in the conversation, don't be afraid to do that. So that is the first. So the first level is, if you're very much an introvert, get a co-founder. Second level is, you are going to do normal conversation, but in the back of your head, you're going to build your ask muscle, is what I say. That when the time comes, don't be afraid to make a big ask of somebody. They may not say, yeah, come on over, I'll give you a purchase order. But they'll say, oh, okay, why don't you, give me your card, or here's my card, give me a call and I'll set up. And then you say, what I really need is, can you find some person in your organization who is actually the decision maker, and can you get me 15 minutes with them? So then you can refine your ask. It's not a one-time deal. It's not like a pitch competition, right? So that's the second level you want to know. And then you have the third level where you are deliberately targeting a high-stakes stakeholder, right? Maybe an investor, maybe a huge customer, maybe a big supplier. So there you want to think about, how do I get over the unfamiliar barrier? Most importantly, find a more familiar champion inside the company, right? So you're not the first person directly going and talking. There is somebody that you knew who introduced you to somebody through whom you went. Make sure that you have somebody who is also a champion for you. And very often the people who will be your champions are your first customers. So if you already have some customers, bring the customer along, or ask the customer to find that other big stakeholder and set up the meeting with you. Don't be afraid to ask your current stakeholders, your current customers, your current suppliers, even sometimes your current employees. So the unfamiliarity goes away because you're not going directly. And the final thing is, if you are indeed going directly, once again, don't worry about being over prepared. Do your homework the way you can. Go in there and then be open to the fact that you might not know all the answers. And if they ask you a question, tell them frankly, you know what? I never thought of that. Can you give me a little bit of time? I'll come back to you. Or always make it about them. Ask them, how would you do it? I don't know question. What would be your advice in connection with that question? So that kind of authentic interaction, and always know you are trying to build a relationship. It is not just a yes or no question on a check or a purchase order or something like that. You're trying to build a relationship. So it's okay if the first meeting does everything that you are going to get second, third, fourth shots. I have a close colleague who is also a serial entrepreneur, but who started out as my student as well. And he gives examples of people with whom he reached out and talked to them, and they literally rejected him, or like, what the heck, who the heck are you, So not very positive at all, with whom he went back later and made a deal. And in some cases, really high potential stakeholder, where later on they want to make a deal and he had to say no. And that also happened. And still the relationship continues, right? After that, he is still able to go back and work with them and ask them for things. So you really want to think relationally about this, like a human being, and not some kind of exam or test or something that you're talking to somebody unfamiliar and, maybe you're not going to be up to the mark, or they're just going to reject you, or they are going to be nasty to you. You don't have to worry about all that. You start with a normal conversation, and even in a formal setup, you always want to keep in mind that this is about a relationship. In fact, if this succeeds, you're going to be doing things with these people for a long time. So from day one, just be yourself, right? Be authentic. And I'm not saying it comes easy, but you can work at it. So hopefully I've given you 4 tiers on the ladder on how you can overcome the unfamiliarity barrier, which from this moment onwards, never say that. Right? There is no such thing as unfamiliarity barrier. There's just people trying to do things. Some people you know well today, some people you don't know as well today. You're getting to know them. You are going to get to know them well tomorrow. So don't worry about that.
Okay, Professor, thanks a lot. I think we have taken 3 minutes more of your time. So I am not sure if you have realized it's already 10 p.m.
Yes.
And yeah, I think we can go on. And usually to academicians, I give 1.5 hours for the talk. Still, it's less because, if you have given a theory which the world is following, there's a lot to talk about it. That's how it is. Usually for the practitioners or from the people from the policy world, 1 hour is kind of enough. So yeah, I think I would close on a high-end note. And personally, for me as a teacher, as a researcher, it was fantastic to see this energy at this point of time. 10 p.m. at night, still it's like 10 a.m. for you. I'm not sure how you manage at this age, but it was fantastic, and I think everyone enjoyed it. Already they are commenting about it. This was live streamed on YouTube. The recordings would be shared with them. I will share with you as well. But overall, fantastic idea. A lot of them probably were hearing it for the first time, so it was new to them. But hopefully, some of them were kind of already seeing it for the second time or the third time, and they were still deepening on the thoughts, and as I could understand from the questions. So thanks a lot for your time. And Sunay, do you have any final words you would love to say?
It was a really great session. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sunay. Thank you, Vaibhav. And thanks all of you for these wonderful questions. That's where I get my energy from. If I had my way, I would do much fewer slides and much more conversation.
No. I think that is. So there weren't many slides. That's a good thing. There were only 3 to 4 slides, but still, they were so deep that 1.5 hours were less. Hopefully, I could invite you for another research talk at IITB or Unicamp in Brazil. And there, probably I would love to give maybe 2 to 3 hours for you to talk, and and people who are interested in research can join there in person or online.
So long as you have vada pav, I'm there.
Yeah, all right, Professor. No, once again, thanks a lot for your time. Yeah. Have a nice trip back to the US. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.